There's a moment, and most men who have lived hard enough will know the one I mean, where you stop being certain about what you're doing and why. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with thunder or a sign from God. It arrives quiet the way frost arrives. You don't see it settle, but when morning comes, everything looks different. I've kept a logbook since I was 19 years old. My father thought it was a woman's habit. My first trail boss said it was a lawyer's habit. I kept it anyway. Dates, weather, horse conditions, water sources, the price of grain in towns I'd never visit again. Numbers, facts, things I could trust. I did not know how to write down what happened at the Riordan auction yard on a Thursday in late October, 1887. I tried 4 times, tore out the pages. Tried again. What you're about to read is the 5th attempt. I'm still not sure I've gotten it right, but I've stopped tearing pages out. Some things are too heavy to keep carrying without setting them down somewhere, even if the setting down is imperfect, even if the words bend under the weight of what they're trying to hold. Her name was Saya. She said it once, quietly, like she wasn't certain she was allowed to use it anymore. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's a habit of mine, too. Start at the beginning. Start at the auction yard. Start with the horse. The Riordan yard smelled the way all auction yards smell. Manure, sawdust, the acidic sweat of men who'd ridden hard and eaten poorly, and underneath all of it, something metallic and anxious that I'd never been able to name but always recognized. Fear smell. Not just the animals, the people too. I had come for a bay gelding. That's the truth of it, nothing noble, nothing fated. I had a ranch 15 miles east of Tucson that needed a working horse, and I had $112 in my coat pocket and a specific animal in mind. A 4-year-old bay with a white sock on his left foreleg that a man named Garrett had been trying to move for 3 weeks. I'd seen the horse. I'd checked his teeth, his hooves, his temperament. He was sound. He was affordable. I was going to buy him, ride home before dark, and write the transaction in my logbook in the neat, uncomplicated way I wrote everything else. October 24, 1887. Bay gelding 4 or purchased $94. White sock left 4. Sound. Good eye. That was the plan. The plan lasted until approximately 10 o'clock in the morning. I remember the time because I'd just pulled out my watch, a brass thing my uncle had left me that ran 2 minutes fast and had a small crack in the crystal that I kept meaning to have repaired when the noise shifted. The crowd of 30-odd men around the central pen changed pitch. Not louder exactly, more focused. The way men sound when something unexpected enters the frame and they haven't yet decided what to do with it. I put the watch away and looked up. The auctioneer was a man named Burl Hackett, large, red-faced, with the particular confidence of a man who'd spent 30 years at the center of transactions, and believed this made him the center of everything. He had his hand on the rope gate of the secondary pen, the smaller one they used for equipment lots and the occasional livestock overflow, and he was saying something in his rolling patter voice that I couldn't quite hear from where I stood near the back fence. What I could see, 2 territorial deputies standing inside the pen gate. One sheriff's man I recognized from town, a young fellow named Aldous who had nervous hands and a reputation for doing what he was told, and a woman. She was Apache. That much was immediately apparent, though I would have been hard-pressed at that moment to tell you what specific band or where from. I knew enough to recognize broad things, her clothing, the particular geometry of her posture, the way she stood as though the ground were hers and the pen around her were an irrelevance. She wore a calico dress that was not hers. I could tell by the way she held herself inside it, slightly apart from it, the way you wear borrowed clothes when you know they'll be returned. Her hair was dark and long, pulled back with a cord. Her face was absolutely still. She was, I would estimate, somewhere between 25 and 35 years of age, though I understood even then that I was probably wrong in both directions. Hackett was explaining something. I pushed forward through the crowd to hear. Found wandering 3 days out of the San Carlos boundary. No documentation, no permit for off-reservation travel. No husband present or accounted for. Where's her family? Someone called. That, Hackett said, with the particular smugness of a man delivering information he'd been holding for exactly this moment, is the question, isn't it? Far as the territory's concerned, this woman represents a ward of the federal government in a jurisdiction dispute. Sheriff Carmody has authorized temporary indenture pending resolution of the documentation matter. Work contract. Entirely legal. There was a murmur, some of it approving, some of it uncertain. A few men near me shifted and looked at the ground, which I took to mean they understood what was being proposed and didn't like it, but had not yet located the will to say so. I understood what was being proposed. I also had not yet located the will to say so. The horse lot, the real auction, was moving along the north fence. I could hear Garrett's gelding being walked through his paces. I told myself that was where I needed to be. I stayed where I was. Hackett continued. A work indenture contract, he explained, domestic labor, ranch work, agricultural assistance. Entirely lawful under territorial ordinance, provided the contracting party maintained certain standards. He waved his hand to indicate the standards were not particularly burdensome, and provided the work period did not exceed 18 months, at which point the documentation matter would be reviewed. Starting bid, Hackett said, given the circumstances, is $40. I wrote in my logbook later that night. The way he said, given the circumstances, was the worst thing I heard that day. It was the voice of a man who knew he was doing something that required a euphemism, but believed the euphemism made the thing itself acceptable. Nobody moved. $40 was a significant sum. $40 was also, I think, more than most men in that yard wanted to pay for a thing they weren't entirely sure they wanted. There is a particular arithmetic of conscience that even hard men will do, given a moment, not because they're good necessarily, but because they're calculating, and sometimes calculation and goodness arrive at the same answer for different reasons. Hackett tried again. 35, no movement. And then the woman spoke. I was close enough by then to hear it clearly. She did not raise her voice. She did not address Hackett. She looked at the assembled men, slowly, with a deliberateness that made several of them look away, and she said something in Apache that I did not understand. Then in English, flat and quiet, and without inflection. Don't buy the horse, buy me. The yard went absolutely silent. Hackett blinked. He was not a man who handled silence well. Ma'am, I'll ask you to. The bay horse with the white sock, she said. She was still not looking at Hackett. She was looking at the men, looking at them the way you look at something you're measuring. He favors his right foreleg. You won't see it in the walk. You'll see it in the 3rd week of work. He'll cost you in veterinary fees and lost labor. She paused. I won't. I felt something happen in my chest that I did not have a word for. The man beside me, a rancher I half knew named Pettigrew, exhaled sharply and muttered something under his breath that I chose not to hear clearly. She had known about the horse. She had watched the lot going past. She had calculated. I'm worth the $40, she said, still quiet. Possibly more. I'll let you determine that for yourselves. There was a long, suspended moment. The kind of moment that leaves a mark, that you will find yourself returning to in the years afterward, trying to understand what you were thinking and why you didn't move faster. I moved faster than most. $40, I said. I don't know what I expected to happen next. I don't think I had thought that far. I am, in general, a man who keeps careful logbooks and plans horse purchases 3 weeks in advance, and what I had just done was neither careful nor planned. I had acted on something older and less articulate than thought, something that lived below the line where language works. Hackett looked at me. Aldous looked at me. Pettigrew looked at me with an expression I will describe as aware that something irrevocable has just occurred. The woman, she had not looked at me yet. $40, Hackett repeated, in his auctioneer's voice, the professionalism reasserting itself because professionalism always does. Gentleman at the back fence, do I hear? 45, said a voice to my left. I turned. A man I didn't recognize. Heavyset, with a sun-darkened neck and the look of someone who ran a large operation and was accustomed to acquiring what he needed. He was looking at the woman the way you look at equipment you're planning to work until it breaks, and then probably not think about again. 50, I said. I had $112 in my coat pocket. I was spending it on something that was not the bay gelding. The logbook entry I made that night, and kept, did not tear out reads, bidding against a man whose name I did not know for something I cannot properly describe. The mathematics of the situation were entirely beyond my usual accounting. The man went to 55. I went to 60. He looked at me differently then, assessed me, made some calculation about whether I had more money and more will than he did, and whether this particular acquisition was worth finding out. He looked at the woman. She had still not looked at me. She was watching the bidding with the same flat attention she'd watched everything else, and I could not tell at all what she thought about what was happening, whether she'd expected it, whether she was afraid, whether the quiet exterior was stone or glass. The man shook his head slightly and stepped back. $60, Hackett said. Going once, going twice. The hammer came down. I had just spent $60 on a work contract for a woman whose name I did not yet know. The gelding sold, I was told later, for $88 to a man from Maricopa County who did not notice the horse's right foreleg. I want to be clear about something because this matters and because I am aware of how this transaction appears on paper. I did not know what I was doing. I did not have a plan. I did not have a speech prepared about the wrongness of indenture contracts or the dignity of human persons. Though I believed in these things, or believed I believed in them, in the comfortable abstract way that men believe in things they haven't been tested on yet. What I had was $60 leaving my pocket, and a contract being pressed into my hand by Aldous, who looked profoundly relieved to be done with the business. The contract was 3 pages. The language was impenetrable. I folded it without reading it and put it in my coat with the remainder of my money. The woman was brought out of the pen by one of the deputies, though he did not touch her, which I noticed and logged internally as something, and stood in front of me. She looked at me then, for the first time directly. Her eyes were very dark and absolutely steady, and what was in them was not gratitude and not relief, and not the thing I think I might have, in some unexamined corner of myself, hoped to see. What was in them was assessment, pure and thorough and completely unadorned. She was looking at me the way she'd looked at the bidding, the way she'd looked at the horse through the fence slats. She was determining what I was worth, what my word was worth, what the next 18 months of her life were going to cost her. "What's your name?" I asked. A pause. Not hesitation. She did not seem like a woman who hesitated, more like she was deciding something. "Saya," she said. "I'm Cal Mercer," I said. "I have a ranch east of town. I don't need much actually. I need to tell you." I stopped. I was aware of men around me, aware of how this looked, aware that whatever I said next would be heard and remembered and probably told incorrectly for years. "I'd like to talk to you somewhere that isn't here." She looked at me for another 3 full seconds, long enough that I became aware of my own breathing. "Your horse," she said, "can it carry double?" I had come on my roan mare, Delaney. She was not young, but she was sturdy. "Yes," I said. "Then let's go," Saya said. She walked toward the yard gate without looking back to see if I was following, as though the question of whether I would follow had already been resolved and did not need monitoring. I followed. We rode for 2 miles without speaking. I want to say I used the silence to think, to organize, to prepare some coherent account of my intentions. What I mostly did was grip the reins and watch the road and become increasingly aware that a woman I'd bought at an auction 45 minutes ago was sitting behind me on my horse and had not said a single word about where she needed to go. Finally, she said, "You didn't want the contract." It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "You'll tear it up." "If you want me to." Another silence, Delaney's hooves on the hard-packed road. October light flat and pale, the Ocotillo casting thin shadows. "Not yet," she said. I turned slightly in the saddle, not enough to see her, but enough to indicate I was listening. "The man who bid against you," she said. "He'll be back. He has others. They'll say the contract is mine now, that I ran. If you tear the contract, there's no record of where I am." I understood this, slowly and imperfectly, but I understood it. So keeping the contract means you have legal claim, which means anyone who comes looking has to deal with you first. A pause. "I'm using you," she said, flatly, as a statement of fact rather than an apology. "I'd like you to know that clearly." I thought about this for a moment. "All right," I said. "You don't object?" "I'm trying to determine if I should." She made a sound that might have been, in some other circumstance, the beginning of a laugh. It was very small, and it was over almost before I'd registered it. "What do you need?" I asked. "Time," she said. 3 weeks, maybe 4. There are people I need to find, messages I need to send after that." She stopped. "After that you'll go?" "Yes." I nodded. The road curved. Delaney adjusted. I wrote in my head where the logbook lives before it goes to paper. Bought a woman I cannot keep and cannot return. The mathematics of the situation remain entirely beyond my usual accounting. "The horse," I said. "The gelding, how did you know about his leg?" She was quiet for long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then, I watched him walk past the pen 3 times. The 4th time was enough to be certain. "You have a good eye for horses." "My father did," she said. "I learned from him." Past tense, I noticed it, did not ask, wrote it down internally in the private logbook where I put the things I wasn't ready to account for yet. We rode the rest of the way to the ranch without speaking, and the silence was not the silence of strangers, quite, but it was not yet anything else either. It was the silence of 2 people in an arrangement they hadn't chosen and hadn't fully processed, riding toward something neither of them could entirely see from where they were sitting. Delaney's hooves on the road. October light on the Ocotillo. The weight of a contract in my coat pocket, folded and unread. The ranch was not much. I want to be honest about that. It was not the operation that a man pictures when he pictures a ranch, not the sweeping thing with hired hands and a proper barn and a woman in the kitchen and the whole architecture of a life that someone else might want to visit. It was a working place, functional, spare, oriented entirely toward labor, a main house of 4 rooms, a barn that needed 1 wall repaired, a corral that worked, and a sequoia that worked when it rained enough, which in October was not a certainty. It ran, at that time, 60-some cattle, 2 horses, a mule I'd named Congressman for his obstinacy, and a dog of indeterminate breed and considerable personal conviction named Boots. Boots met us at the gate. He was a large dog, some kind of hound cross, mostly brown, with opinions about everyone and the vocal range to express them. He met every arrival with an extended address. He met Saya with an investigation so thorough that she finally put her hand down and let him smell it, and after approximately 30 seconds of deliberation, Boots sat down next to her leg with the air of a man who has rendered judgment. "He likes you," I said. "Dogs know things," she said. "What kind of things?" She looked at me with the same measuring expression she'd used at the auction yard. "Whether a place is worth staying in," she said, "for now." I showed her the house. The spare room, which I used for storage and which therefore required approximately an hour of clearing before it was inhabitable. She helped without being asked and without comment, moving boxes and rolled canvas and a broken saddle tree with efficient practicality. When I brought a cot in from the barn and unfolded it against the wall, she tested the frame with 2 fingers and declared it sufficient. "Do you need anything?" I asked. "Sleep," she said. "Water, tomorrow I'll need to see the property." "I'll take you around in the morning." She nodded, started to close the door, then stopped. "The contract," she said, "does it bother you?" I considered the honest answer. The fact that it exists bothers me. What I intend to do with it doesn't. She looked at me for a long moment. "You're an unusual man, Cal Mercer." "I keep a logbook," I said. "Most people find it strange." She did not respond to this. The door closed. I stood in the hallway of my own house listening to the silence of the spare room, which was a different kind of silence than any other silence I'd encountered, and tried to remember the last time I'd made a decision as fast and as irrevocable and as completely instinctive as the one I'd made this morning. I couldn't come up with anything. I went to the kitchen table and opened the logbook and tried to write the day's entry. October 24, 1887. Bay gelding not purchased, $60. I stopped, crossed out what I'd written, tried again. October 24, 1887. Went to Riordan's for a horse. Came home with something I don't have a category for yet. I kept that one. Boots had followed Saya to the spare room and was lying outside the closed door with the patience of a dog who has decided where he belongs. I left him there and went to bed. I didn't sleep for a long time. She was up before dawn. I know this because I am also up before dawn, have been since I was a boy, when my father considered sleeping past first light a character deficiency. And when I came through the kitchen at the hour I always came through the kitchen, there was a fire already built in the stove, and a pot of something on it that smelled like neither coffee nor the things I kept in my pantry. I stopped in the doorway. She was at the window, not looking at anything I could identify, just looking out into the blue-gray dark of the pre-sunrise desert, her hands around a clay cup I didn't recognize, which meant she'd either brought it or made it. and either answer felt significant in ways I wasn't prepared to unpack at that hour. "There's coffee on," she said without turning. "Your tin, the good kind." I poured coffee, sat at the table, looked at the logbook open in front of me and didn't write anything. "What's in the pot?" I asked. "Tea de Osha, you won't like it." "What is it for?" A pause, sleeping, anxiety, being somewhere you didn't plan to be. Another pause. I made enough for two. I thought about that for a moment. Then I got up and poured some into a cup and sat back down. It tasted like pine bark and something medicinal, and something else I couldn't place, green and slightly bitter. She was right that I didn't like it. I drank the whole thing. "Your land," she said, still at the window. "The southeast corner, near the dry creek bed." "What about it?" "There's a seep, underground water, maybe 8-10 feet down. The creosote there grows different, taller, more space between them. The roots are finding something." I looked up from my cup. "I've been here 4 years, I didn't see that." "You weren't looking for it?" She turned from the window then and sat across from me at the table, and I had the first real look at her in proper light. She had slept clearly, but not heavily, the kind of rest that keeps the body functional without touching the deeper exhaustion underneath. There were shadows below her eyes that hadn't been there at the auction yard, or that I hadn't had the presence to notice. "I'd like to see the full property today," she said, "before I decide anything." "Decide what?" She looked at me steadily. "Whether what I need to do can be done from here." I put down the coffee. "You said you need to find people, family." The stillness that came over her then was not the stillness of the auction yard, not the controlled, measured blankness of a woman being sold in front of strangers. This was different. This was the stillness of something actually still, water that has stopped moving. "My son," she said. The word sat on the table between us. I had had no idea. Of course I'd had no idea. I'd had approximately 18 hours of knowing this woman existed, but the weight of it landed differently than other information. There was a child. There was a son who was somewhere she was not, and she had been found at an auction yard in Tucson with a borrowed calico dress and a logistical mind, and the quiet of a woman who has gone so far past breaking that she's arrived at some country on the other side of it. "How old?" I asked. 7, she said. "His name is—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. Then, in English they call him Tom. "I don't call him that." "What do you call him?" She looked at me for a moment, and in the look was a measurement I'd seen before but not understood until now. She was deciding how much to give, what was safe to give. She had been calculating me since the auction yard, since before the auction yard, probably since she'd watched the bidding and understood that whoever came out of it holding her contract was a variable she'd have to account for, and she'd been running the numbers on me since before I'd opened my mouth to bid. "Chashka," she said quietly. "It means there isn't an exact word in English, close to small good thing." I looked at my logbook. I didn't write that down. It felt like it would be wrong to write it down. "Where is he?" I asked. "I don't know exactly." She curled both hands around the clay cup. 3 weeks ago, there was a man from the agency at San Carlos. He was taking children for the school. I knew about the school. Most people in the territory knew about the school, in the way you know about a thing without looking at it directly, because looking at it directly requires you to hold a feeling you're not prepared to hold. A school in Pennsylvania. Children taken from their families, trained out of their language and their names and their ways of being in the world, trained into something that was supposed to be better, and that everyone with any honesty in them knew was not better, was just different and more convenient for the people making the decision. They took him without asking, she said, "Yes." The kitchen was very quiet. Through the window, the sky had begun its transition from blue-gray to the particular rose-gold of desert pre-dawn, and the creosote outside the glass was beginning to separate from the dark. 3 days after, she said, I left the reservation without a permit, without documentation. I was trying. She stopped, took a breath. I had a name, a contact, someone who moves letters, sends word. I didn't get there in time. Where is this person? Maricopa, or was. I don't know if she's still there. She had been walking to Maricopa when the deputies found her. Walking because she didn't have a horse. Walking because her son had been taken and she had nothing left to lose by walking. I sat with this information for what felt like a very long time, and was probably 30 seconds. I have a mule, I said. She blinked. The first blink I'd seen, the first involuntary physical reaction, the first gap in the measurement. Congressman, he's disagreeable, but he's sound. And I pulled the logbook toward me, open to the back pages where I kept names and contacts. I have a man in Maricopa I've bought cattle from twice. Name of Delgado. He's not political, but he knows people. He might know your contact. She stared at me. Not the measuring look, something else. Something rower and more dangerous, because hope is always more dangerous than despair. Hope requires more from a person. Hope has a cost that despair does not. Why are you doing this? She asked. I thought about the real answer, found it and sat with it before I said it. At the auction yard, you told those men not to buy the horse. You told them exactly why they'd regret it, gave them the specific information, clear as you could make it. And then you told them to buy you instead. I looked at her. You were asking for help. You were asking for it in the only language those men understood, money and practical value. And every man in that yard heard you and didn't move. She was absolutely still. I was in that yard, I said. I was one of those men. I heard you and stood there for too long before I moved. I paused. This is me still moving. She looked at me for a long time. Then very slowly she set down the clay cup. The land first, she said. Show me the southeast corner. I showed her the property. All of it, the full circuit, took most of the morning, Delaney and Congressman between us and Boots ranging out ahead and circling back with his reports. She looked at everything with the same focused deliberateness she applied to everything. The pasture grass, the condition of the water trough, the way the cattle moved in the near pasture, the angle of the soil in the dry creek bed. At the southeast corner, she dismounted without speaking, handed me Congressman's lead, and walked 20 yards through the creosote to a patch of ground that looked, to me, indistinguishable from the ground around it. She stood there, looked at the plants, crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the earth. Here, she said. I came closer. Crouched next to her, I could not see what she was seeing. How do you know? The smell of the soil after rain is different here, darker, and she moved her fingers slightly, touched the base of a creosote stem. See how the root collar swells? The plant is drinking more than its neighbors. She stood. 8 feet, maybe 9, you could dig a secondary water point here, better for the southeast pasture. I looked at the ground and then at her. You know ranching. My father ran horses for 20 years on less water than you have here. A pause. He was very good at it. Past tense again. We rode back slowly, the October light going warm and gold, and then beginning its angle toward afternoon. I had begun, somewhere in the morning's circuit, to see the property differently, through a lens that wasn't mine, that noticed things I'd walked past 400 times without seeing. It was unsettling in the way that useful things are often unsettling. The recognition that you've been missing something obvious. I want to write a letter, she said when we were back at the barn and unsaddling. To the contact in Maricopa, if Delgado can get it there. I can ride to Delgado's tomorrow, I said. Take it myself. She stopped with her hand on Congressman's cinch, looked at me. I can take a day, I said. The ranch won't fall over. There was a very long pause. Congressman shifted his weight and expressed his opinion of the delay through his nostrils. You'll need something from me, she said. Not an accusation, a negotiation. I'm not asking for charity, Cal Mercer. I don't know what you need help with on this property, but I'll find it. The barn wall, I said. East side. The post is failing. I've been meaning to get to it for 6 months. Show me the post. I showed her the post. She looked at it, walked around it, pressed her hands against the wood. I can fix this, she said. I'll need cedar post, 12 feet. You have the tools. In the barns. Then show me where the cedar is, and fix your schedule for tomorrow. I fixed my schedule for tomorrow. She wrote the letter that evening. I gave her paper and pen, and she sat at the kitchen table and wrote for 45 minutes, and I stayed out of the kitchen and tried not to be obvious about it. The letter was not in English. I could see this from the doorway without reading it. The shapes of the words were different, and there was something about watching her write in her own language, in the language that was actually hers, and not the one she'd been using since the auction yard, that made me need to look away. When she was finished, she folded the letter and sealed it with candle wax and set it on the table. There's a second person she can contact, Saya said when I came back into the kitchen. In Pennsylvania, someone near the school. She pressed her fingers flat on the folded paper. Someone who sends word back when they can. When children are arrived. When they're still there, she looked at the table. Some of them get sick, some of them. Don't say it, I said, without thinking. She looked up at me sharply. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean. No, she said, slowly. No, it's all right. She took a breath, let it out. Some of them are sent back, she said, choosing a safer fact. If they're sick, if they can't adapt, they're sent back and the families don't always know in time to. She stopped again. I sat down across from her, left the space quiet. He's healthy, she said, finally. He's strong. He was running the morning they came. Her voice was perfectly steady, which told me something. People's voices go steady when they've told themselves a story enough times that they've used up the surface emotion and are running on something deeper and more structural. He was running in the field and the steadiness cracked, just slightly, like the crack in my watch crystal, not catastrophic, not fixed. He didn't know to be frightened yet. He thought it was something else. She stopped. I said nothing. She pressed her hands flat on the table and looked at them and breathed, very carefully, the way someone breathes when they are choosing to stay present instead of going somewhere inside themselves where the weight can't reach them. It was the most deliberate thing I'd seen her do, and I'd watched her be deliberate about everything since the moment I'd met her. I'll get the letter to Delgado tomorrow, I said. She looked up, nodded, then looked back at her hands. I got up and put more wood on the fire because it was something to do, and the kitchen needed it, and there are moments when being useful is the only respectable response. She had the barn post replaced by noon the next day. I don't mean she'd begun it. I mean she'd completed it, dug out the failing post, set the new cedar, packed and tamped the base, reattached the siding boards that had pulled loose. I came back from Delgado's in the early afternoon to find the barn wall solid and Boots asleep in the shade of it, and Sayer in the corral with Delaney, running the mare through her paces at a walk and then a trot. Delaney, who did not trust most people and required extensive introduction before she'd work with anyone new, was moving with her ears relaxed and her head low. I stood at the corral gate and watched for a moment. She favors her left hip, Saya called without looking at me. When she turns right, she compensates. Have you been working her on hard ground? Sometimes, I said. Softer ground for 2 weeks, tallow on the joint. She brought Delaney to a walk, then a halt. Delgado. Letters on its way, I said. He knows the contact, said he'd been moving letters for her for 3 years, didn't ask questions. He'll have word back within a week, maybe 10 days. She stood very still in the center of the corral. Delaney put her nose against Saya's shoulder and stood there. 10 days, Saya said. Maybe faster. She nodded. Then she walked Delaney to the gate and handed me the lead rope, and I saw, in the few seconds it took to make the transfer, that her eyes were very bright in a way that was not happiness and was not grief exactly, but was something compound and difficult and human that I did not have a word for and didn't try to name. Thank you, she said, quietly, and then she went to the barn. I stood with Delaney and wrote the day's entry in my head while Boots continued his nap, and the October sun moved 1 degree further toward the San Pedro hills. The word came back in 8 days. Not 10, 8. Which meant either Delgado had found a fast writer or the contact in Maricopa had been waiting for this specific letter with a specific answer already formed, ready to send back as soon as it arrived. I rode out to Delgado's myself on the 1st of November and came back with an envelope and a knot in my stomach that I could not entirely justify on the information I had, which was none. I just knew, in the way you know things sometimes before you know them, that the letter was not simple. Saya was in the southeast corner of the property when I arrived. I could see her from the road, a distant figure with a shovel and boots attending. She had spent 3 of the 8 days digging the seep point she'd identified, working in the early morning before the heat. The 4th day, water had come in at 6 feet, shallower than she'd predicted, which she'd announced with a satisfaction that was quiet and total, and made me feel for reasons I still find difficult to articulate like I'd witnessed something important. I unsaddled Delaney and walked out to the southeast corner. She saw me coming and read the envelope in my hand from 30 yards. Her face did the thing it did sometimes, that involuntary reorganizing, the inner machinery becoming visible for just a second before the stillness reasserted itself. She put the shovel down. I handed her the letter. She read it standing up, right there in the desert between the creosote and the new water point, and I looked at the seep and at Boots and at the San Pedro hills and did not look at her face. It took approximately 2 minutes. Then she folded the letter. "He's there," she said. He arrived well. They've cut his hair." A long pause. "They always cut their hair." I looked at her then. Her expression was the controlled one, the managed one, but underneath it I could see the fault lines, the places where it had cost her to hold the shape. "Is he," I stopped, began again. "Is he all right?" "The contact says he's not sick." She pressed the letter against her chest, both hands flat. "That he's adjusting." The word came out like she'd had to carry it a long way, and it had not gotten lighter in the carrying. "That he asks for me in the mornings, that by midday he stops asking." I understood what that meant. I did not say what it meant. "The contact can send a letter back," Saya said. If I write one, he can read." A pause. "He's 7, he could read Apache. They won't let him read Apache." I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You could write in English," I said. "If you write simply enough words he'd be learning in his first year there." She looked at me. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's what's available." She was quiet for a long time, looking at the seep, which had a thin inch of water in the bottom of it now, dark and real, and found after 4 years of existing right under the surface of a thing I thought I knew. "I need to get him back," she said. "Not wait for him to be sent back, get him back." "I know. That requires," she stopped. I could see her sorting through options, running the logistics the way she ran everything. "That requires money, and someone who can represent a legal claim, and a reason the agency will accept." She looked at me. "I have none of these things." "I have some money," I said carefully. "Less than I had 2 weeks ago." The corner of her mouth moved, almost nothing. "You spent $60 on a contract." "I did. And you've been feeding me, and your mule is in better spirits than he was when I arrived. I don't know what you were doing to that animal." "He's disagreeable," I said defensively. "He was in pain," she said. "His left shoe was set wrong. I reset it 2 days ago." I looked at the hills. I didn't know. "I know you didn't." A pause. "You're not a bad man, Cal Mercer. You're just unobservant about some things." I considered this assessment. It was accurate. "About legal claims," I said. "I don't know what's available, but I know a man in Tucson who does law work. Not the kind of man who does what Hackett does. Different." I paused. "He's argued against the school before. Didn't win, but he argued." She looked at me with an expression that I was beginning to learn. One I'd only seen 3 or 4 times in 2 weeks, but was starting to recognize. The expression she wore when she was revising her assessment of a variable, when the numbers came out different than expected. "Why," she said. "Why what? Why are you still moving?" The question landed with the same weight it had carried the first time, in the kitchen with the tea d'eau chaud and the folded letter, and I gave her the same kind of honest silence before I answered. "I told you," I said. "I heard you at the auction yard and I moved too slow. I'm trying to correct for that." She looked at me for a very long time. "It's not enough," she said. "To correct for one moment, the moment is," she looked at the seep at the thin inch of water. "The moment was just the surface. The thing underneath goes deeper." "I know that." "Do you?" "I'm learning it," I said. "I learn slowly. I keep a logbook to compensate." She did something then that I don't know how to describe accurately, and am afraid of describing badly. She looked at me, not the measuring look, not the assessment, not the managed stillness, and she laughed. A short, real laugh, involuntary and surprised and genuine, and it was over in under a second, and she looked slightly startled by it herself, as though it had arrived without permission. "A logbook," she said. "Since I was 19. She shook her head, not disapproval, something else. "Write this down then," she said. "The lawyer's name." I wrote it down. The lawyer's name was Edward Fane. He operated out of a narrow office on Congress Street that smelled of paper and coffee and the particular optimism of a man who believed in arguments. He was younger than I expected, 32 or 33, with ink-stained fingers and the slightly manic energy of someone who had more cases than ours and had made peace with the arithmetic. We rode in together on a Monday, Sayer and I, side by side on Delaney and Congressman. I had offered to go alone and present the situation. She had given me a look that communicated, without words, that she would be presenting her own situation, and I could come along or not as I preferred. I came along. Fane listened for 20 minutes without interrupting. This impressed me. Most men interrupt after 5. He sat behind his paper-stacked desk with his hands folded and his expression careful, and he listened to Saya describe everything. The reservation, the agency man, the morning her son had been running in the field, the permit, the deputies, the auction yard, and he did not interrupt and he did not flinch. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The Carlisle model," he said. "Your son would be in the Pennsylvania school." "Yes. There's a legal mechanism," he said slowly. "It was tested twice in the last 3 years, once in Arizona territory, once in New Mexico, and lost both times, but the argument hasn't been exhausted. It requires establishing that the removal was procedurally irregular." He looked at Saya. "Was there documentation?" "A removal orders." "The agency man had papers," she said. "I don't know what they said, I wasn't shown them." "Were you present when your son was taken?" "No, I was at the water. When I came back he was already," she stopped. "My neighbor told me what happened. She saw the papers." Fane leaned forward. "Would your neighbor testify to what she saw in affidavit form at minimum?" A pause. "She's on the reservation." Saya's jaw tightened slightly. "She'd be risking her situation." "I know," Fane said. "I'm not underestimating what I'm asking. I'm asking because if she can, it changes what's available to us." Us, he had said us. I wrote it down later in the logbook because it mattered. Fane said us without pausing, without explaining why. As though it were already obvious where he stood. Saya was quiet for a long moment. "I'll write to her," she said finally. "I'll explain what's needed." Fane nodded. "The other element," he hesitated. "This will require money, filing fees, a rider to Pennsylvania potentially, correspondence with the school. I have to be transparent with you. I can reduce my fee. I've done it before in these cases, but I can't eliminate it." "How much?" I asked. He named a number. I did the arithmetic. The arithmetic was uncomfortable. The arithmetic required me to think about the cattle I could sell and the fence repairs I could defer and the winter supplies I could minimize. "Give me a week," I said. Fane nodded, looked at Saya. "I want to be honest with you about the odds," he said. "They're not good. The territory has deferred to the federal agencies in 7 out of 8 similar cases." But he stopped. Then, with the particular energy of a man who had been arguing against unfavorable odds long enough to make it a habit. "The 8th case is the one I keep working toward." Saya looked at him steadily. "So do I," she said. We rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, the sun behind us and the desert going orange and copper around us, and Congressman in one of his periodically cooperative moods that I had come to understand were entirely Saya's doing. She had identified his bad shoe in the first week, rebalanced his feed in the second, and was now in the process of convincing him through consistent patience that humans were occasionally tolerable, a project I had attempted for 2 years without success. "The money," she said, we were nearly to the gate. "I want to know what you're giving up." "Don't worry about it." "Kel." She used my name with a particular flatness when she wanted me to be honest, in the same way she used it when she wanted me to stop being obtuse about something. It was a small thing. I had started to notice small things. "Some fence repairs, the new saddle I've been deferring, 2 cattle I'd planned to hold through winter." I paused. "It's fine." "It's not fine," she said. "It's a cost. Most things worth doing have a cost." "That's not an answer." I looked at the gate, at the property, at the barn with the new cedar post on the east wall, solid and straight, at the southeast corner where there was now a water point that had existed for 4 years without anyone finding it. "What you did at the auction yard," I said, "you made a calculation. You looked at those men and you decided to give them the most practical possible argument for your own value because you knew the other arguments, the moral ones, the human ones, wouldn't land the way you needed them to land. You gave them numbers, horse versus person framed as economics." I paused. "I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks, about what that costs someone to make that calculation. To stand in a pen and argue your own worth in the only language a room full of strangers would understand." She was very still on Congressman. "I'm not spending money on your situation," I said. "I'm spending money on what happens when someone finally takes the argument seriously." I looked at her. "Those are different things." She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she looked forward toward the gate. "The southeast pasture," she said after a while. "If you open the secondary channel from the Acequia, I've been looking at the grade, you could run more cattle through there by spring. 10, maybe 12 more head. That would offset the cost of the cattle you're selling." I stared at her. "I measured the grade yesterday," she said. "In the afternoon when you were doing the north fence, the slope is right. The Acequia wall will need reinforcing on the turn, but you have the stone for it. It's sitting in a pile near the barn. I assumed it was waiting for something." "It's been waiting for 3 years," I said. "I didn't know what it was for." She was quiet for a moment. Then very carefully, in the voice she used for things that cost her something to say, "I want it to be an exchange, not charity, not what that contract said." She reached into her jacket and pulled out the folded paper, the indenture contract. She held it out to me. "Tear it up." I looked at her. "You said not yet." "It's yet," she said. "The letter from the school is enough record. The lawyer has enough." She met my eyes. "Tear it up." I took the contract, tore it once, twice, a third time, let the pieces fall. Congressman stepped on one of them, which felt appropriate. "The Acequia grade," I said. "Show me where the channel needs to go." "After dinner," she said. "After dinner," I agreed. She wrote the letter to her neighbor on the reservation the same night. She wrote it in Apache. I sat at the other end of the table and did not look. She also that night wrote something else. I didn't ask what it was. But later, when I came through the kitchen for water, I saw on the table a different paper, smaller, denser writing, the characters precise and closed together. It was not a letter. It was something else. A document, maybe, or a story. Or something that isn't a letter and isn't a story, and is the kind of thing that only exists in the language it's written in, that loses itself in translation, that lives in the space between what can be carried across and what can't. I got my water, went back to bed. The neighbor's affidavit arrived 11 days later. It had come through 4 hands, reservation to Maricopa, Maricopa to a freighter, freighter to Delgado, Delgado to my ranch. And it was written in both Apache and English. 2 columns, word for word, in a hand that was careful and slightly uneven, the hand of someone who had learned to write in one language and then learned again in another. Saya read it at the kitchen table in the early morning with the October light. November now, actually, November and colder, frost on the creosote outside the window. And she did not react visibly when she read it, not visibly, but her right hand pressed flat on the table in the way it pressed flat on things when she was holding something. She read it twice, then she looked up. "She took a risk," she said. "Yes." "She has children." "Yes." She looked back at the affidavit. "She did it anyway." A long pause. She wrote in the margin, she touched a corner of the paper that I couldn't read from where I sat. She wrote, "Tell him you're coming, even if you don't know when, tell him." The kitchen was quiet for a long moment. "I'll take it to Fane today," I said. "We'll take it," she said. We took it. Fane filed the motion on a Friday in mid-November. The odds, he reminded us, were not good. The territorial courts deferred. The agency had institutional weight. The school had congressional support. Against all of this they had 1 affidavit, 1 irregular procedure, and 1 lawyer who had lost 7 out of 8 similar arguments and treated the 8th like a reason to keep showing up. "What do we do while we wait?" I asked. Fane looked at me. "You go home, you work your land, you write letters." He looked at Saya. "You write to your son simple words, words he can read." She nodded. We went home. She wrote to Chashka that evening. In English, as Fane had suggested, simple words, short sentences. She read each sentence aloud quietly as she wrote it, under her breath, testing the sound, checking whether the meaning carried in the simpler language or whether something essential had been stripped out in the translation. I was at the other end of the table, not trying to hear, hearing anyway. "I am thinking of you. I am not far. I know your name." She read that last one twice, paused a long time between the second reading and continuing. "Your name is yours. They cannot have it. I am coming." I looked at my logbook and wrote nothing. She sealed the letter and set it on top of Fane's address, and then sat very still at the kitchen table with her hands in her lap for a long time. Boots came in from the cold and pressed his head against her knee without ceremony, the way he did when he had assessed that something was needed and had determined that he was capable of providing it. She put her hand on his head. Outside, the first real cold of November had arrived. The creosote held its shape against the wind. The water in the southeast corner seep was 3 inches now, dark and real, found after 4 years of running underground unseen. I wrote the date in my logbook, and then one line below it, in smaller writing than I usually use. The kind of small that means you're writing something you're not entirely sure you're allowed to write. She is the most persistent thing I have encountered in 41 years on this earth. The word for what she is doesn't exist in my vocabulary. I am trying to learn it. The motion was heard in late January. It was denied. Fain filed an appeal. The appeal was also denied. He filed a second appeal on different grounds in March. I need to say something about the months between. The property changed. I don't know how else to put it. The secondary channel from the acequia was dug in December. Saya and I and Congressman working 3 weekends. And by February, the southeast pasture had water, and by April, I had 11 new head through it, and the arithmetic was different than it had been in October. The barn was better. The mare's hip improved. Congressman became, I will not say pleasant because that would be dishonest, but he became tolerable in a way he had not previously been, which I attributed entirely to Saya, and which Congressman acknowledged by occasionally allowing me to saddle him without expressing theatrical objection. She taught me to see the land differently. I can't explain how this works exactly. It wasn't lessons, it wasn't instruction. It was proximity. She looked at things and I watched her look at things, and gradually I started to see what she was seeing. The way the grass lay in the morning, what it told you about the night's temperature. The particular sound the wind made in the north when the weather was about to shift. The way the cattle moved in the hour before a storm. I kept writing all of it down in the logbook. It was getting thick. She wrote to Chashka every 2 weeks. Fain forwarded the letters to the school. Whether the letters arrived, we didn't know. Whether they were delivered to her son, we didn't know. Whether he sat somewhere in a Pennsylvania classroom in the winter of 1887 to 1888 and heard someone read a letter that said, "I know your name and I am coming," we didn't know. She wrote them anyway. The second appeal was heard in May. I was in the courtroom. Saya was in the courtroom. Fain was at the front of the room, making his argument in the measured, insistent way he made arguments. Not theatrical, not emotional, just persistent, just steady, just working the logic one step at a time like a man who has internalized that this is how change happens. Not in a moment, but in the accumulated weight of kept arguments. The judge was a man I didn't know, older, tired-looking. He listened to Fain. He read the affidavit again, slowly. He looked at the agency's counterfiling. He looked at Saya, who sat beside me in the gallery and was absolutely, completely, totally still. Not the auction yard stillness, not the managed stillness, but something else, something that I had come to understand was not the absence of feeling, but feeling so large and so loaded that it required the entire body to hold it in place. He looked at his desk for a long time. He said that the procedural irregularity in the removal documentation, the fact that no authorized female guardian signature had been obtained, as required under the specific agency guidelines applicable to San Carlos at the time of removal, constituted a defect in the original removal order. He said that he was not in a position to compel the school to return the child. He said that he was in a position to compel the agency to facilitate the return. There is a difference between these two things that is complicated and lawyerly, and that Fain spent 20 minutes explaining to us in the courthouse hallway. The upshot, simplified, it was not a victory. It was a door. It was a door that was not fully open but was no longer fully closed. Fain was already talking about next steps. Saya was standing in the courthouse hallway with her hand against the wall, and she was not crying, she was not, but her eyes were very bright, and her breathing was visible, and she was holding herself exactly as still as she'd held herself in the auction yard in October, in the corral with Delaney, in the kitchen when she'd read the neighbor's affidavit. Except this stillness was different. This was not a woman managing what she couldn't change. This was a woman holding still because movement might break something, some precise, fragile arrangement of possibility that had just barely become real. I stood next to her and didn't say anything. After a while she said, very quietly, "He's coming home." Not a certainty. We both knew it wasn't a certainty. The road between a partially opened door and a 7-year-old boy on a train west was long and procedural, and would require feign and correspondence and patience, and probably more money and certainly more time. But she said it anyway. He's coming home. I wrote it in the logbook that night. The logbook is very thick now. I've started a second one. She asked me, the night after the hearing, what I would do when she left. We were sitting on the porch. May evening, the desert cooling, the stars beginning to come in. Boots between us, his large head on his paws. Manage, I said. Poorly, she said, not unkindly. Probably. A long pause. The stars coming in. One of the cattle moving in the near pasture, I could hear it, could tell from the sound that it was one of the new head, the ones from the southeast pasture, moving with the settled confidence of an animal that has found where its water is. The Apache Channel, she said. There's a second branch. I didn't finish the survey, north side near the big saguaro. The grade is right, but the soil type changes at about 40 feet. You'll need to shore the walls there or it'll collapse in the summer rains. I looked at her. I'm telling you, she said, so that you know. You could tell me when you come back, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, people don't always come back when they plan to. I know that, I said. I'm accounting for it in the optimistic column. The sound she made was very small and very real, and I did not look at her when she made it. Keep a logbook, she said. Of the channel work, I want to read it. You'll have to come back for that. I know, she said. The stars were fully in now, the whole desert sky wide open above us. The kind of sky you only get away from towns. The kind that makes you aware of the scale of everything, and also, somehow, the smallness of it.